Okay, so good afternoon. I'm Jason Hubbart. I'm a professor and director in Davis College. I'm a professor actually in two divisions in plant and soil sciences, as well as in forestry and natural resources. And I direct the Institute of Water Security and Science, teach classes, do research, all that other fun stuff. That's great. So hey, thanks for the opportunity to speak with you today. Um, I've got a quick outline, and let me expand my talk here. Okay. So I was asked to cover a few topic areas about grant writing, going after grants, and how is that done. And I will preface this talk with there's a lot to go over, a lot to learn when going after grants. And so if you get through this talk without falling asleep, number one, uh, know that even though it may be a bit confusing and you're going like, whoa, there's so much material, it does, if you keep after it, it gets a lot easier relatively quickly. So I'm going to start out with, I was asked actually by Darien to report on these things. My experience in grant writing, that's going to be really fast. Applying for grants, do's and don'ts, application requirements or content, and the resources to help find grants at WVU, and a grant application timeline. And I will just qualify this again. There's a whole lot of variability in all of this because there's a lot of funding agencies ranging from federal to county or city grants and everything in between, including agencies, right? So this is just a highly variable field. And then there will be time for any discussion or questions at the end. So I also wanted to just start with a little bit of my background. Just one quick slide. There's a map of, well, you can recognize that country, I'm assuming, and the red dots are where I've been in general. So where I come from a 2,000 acre dairy farm north of Spokane, Washington State. It's where I spent most of my childhood. When I left home, I started out with 3 years of electrical engineering, and then I moved to California State University, Fresno, for a couple of reasons. One, I wanted to go to the front lines of natural resource issues, I guess, and I kind of felt like in the West that's where a lot of it's happening, and I thought no better place to learn than the front lines of the battle. And so I went there, but I also had some family there, and so it was nice to spend time around them for a few years. I was there from 1998 to 2003. During that time, I changed my undergrad degree over to ecology. So I ended up getting a bachelor's in ecology, and then I moved right into a master's degree program, and I did a master's in forestry, forest ecology rather, and mammalogy. So it was two-pronged master's. And I took a year off to teach at Fresno City College. By the way, Fresno City College is one of the, if not the oldest city college in the country. The largest population of students at a city college. When I was there were over 115 different dialects. It was an amazing experience. And I got to teach a class in biology as an adjunct my first semester, and in a classroom with 150 students in it. And it took me 15 minutes to figure out that that's what I wanted to do with my career. And so in 2003, I started my PhD program at the University of Idaho, where I did a disciplinary switch again, because in my brain, I also realized then that my brain works with physics and math, and it's to me, physical processes govern biological systems, and so that was my perspective and how things work to me, and it's worked out well. So I was there at Idaho until 2007. I graduated with a PhD on the 17th of August, 2007, and I was teaching at the University of Missouri on the 20th of that same month. 3 days later, it was a whirlwind trip and so much fun, amazing. These are the best jobs, I'll tell you. And so in 2015, I got recruited away from Mizzou. Things went well in Missouri, by the way, but I got recruited away and approached from WVU to come here and be the inaugural director of the Institute of Water Security and Science. That was just too good to pass up. It's such a wonderful, beautiful state. And so here I am, no regrets. My major point, I guess I would say that we all come from somewhere, different cultures, backgrounds, environments, institutions, training, etc. It goes on. This translates to how we do things differently, not just to how we do things, but how we do things differently. There are many methods and motivations to go after grants, and you'll develop your own. So what I'm going to present to you are some ideas, and later on a kind of a pathway that you can work on to get through the process, but you will develop your own system. But first, it's good to know how the system works, kind of. So that's what we're gonna, oops, okay. Right, so in terms of my grant writing experience, so just some stats to start with. If you haven't heard this before, you need to know it. It's the truth, it's the cold hard truth of it. On average, approximately 15% plus or minus of grant proposals get funded. For the National Science Foundation, that number can be smaller depending on venue. I've seen low as 6% for NSF grants. For USDA NIFA, that's the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, that number can be a bit larger. I've seen that as high as 18%. And by the way, it can also be low, below 10% in terms of success rate. It just depends on the venue. There's just a lot of variability. So in the past 13 years, that's how long I've been a professor, a faculty member. I've had about 60 grants funded for a total of almost $34 million. I feel I've been very fortunate. I've had a high success rate of about 40%, but I've also written about 150 grant proposals, or an average of a little over 11 a year. And that's true. By the way, that's a real number. It ebbs and flows. There are years where I've only written 3 or 4 or something like that. I got lazy those years, I guess, but then there are other years where I've written a lot more. So it just kind of depends on the opportunities that come along and the ideas that you have. And, we scientists get ideas and we have to do something about them or we can't sleep, right? So you go after the funding to do something about it. So I've got a number of slides now about applying for grants and things to do. So this is the applying for grants do section. I can't overstate that one of the things you want to be sure to do is read through the entire solicitation, understand it, follow all instructions, and reread it as often as you need to, so that you're sure that you don't miss anything. There are often some quick but important first steps that should be taken to avoid potential deal breakers. What I mean by a deal breaker is one where you submit your proposal and it's immediately rejected by the funding agency, or the reviewers are just so annoyed by it for some reason that because you didn't follow some instruction that it's declined anyway. So you don't want to annoy your reviewers. You want to make sure that it slips through every hurdle that it needs to in good shape, that it's beautiful piece of work, artwork, and you have that best chance because you still have to go against the scrutiny of peers to get it funded. And that's an arduous process. All of these criteria is what drives down that success rate. Plus there's limited funds available, right? Okay, so some of the items that are some of those quick and first steps include deadlines. That's one of the first things I ever look at whenever I see a request for proposals or applications. It's what's the deadline? How much time do I have to do this? If the proposal includes a budget request, you always need to first submit the entire proposal for internal review to the WVU Office of Sponsored Programs. That rule is pretty much the same at any institution. OSP's processing guidelines stipulates that OSP requires that all proposals, electronic or otherwise, be submitted through the COAS system and approved and received 5 working days prior to an agency deadline. Sometimes there's a letter of intent required or a pre-application, and that needs to be among the first things to look for because usually those are due earlier, a lot earlier. And the turnaround for that is usually fairly quick too. So an RFP might come out and they'll tell you, you need to have your LOI, your letter of intent, submitted like a month or 2 later, something like that. Typically those do not have to go through OSP, but sometimes it's a good idea to do that if there's a lot of funding if it's a big ticket item, lots of money funding asked. Eligibility. So this is really important. Can a university or a nonprofit, so this is the university's WVU or nonprofit being the University Research Corporation, apply? If both are eligible, the default application should almost always go to the research corporation because they're classified as the nonprofit entity. That doesn't mean they can't stick, they don't stick their fingers into the funds and take some out when you get the funding, but I'll talk about that a little later. There can be several other eligibility requirements that may prevent the PI from applying, such as university type. So sometimes grant opportunities are only targeted towards certain institutions. So HBCUs are one example. West Virginia State University is an example of one of those institutions. Every state has one, by the way, and that's great. And there are lots of other criteria too. And so sometimes they're targeted to city colleges, it's true, or tier 2 teaching institutions, for example. And so there are those differences. Sometimes there are geographic limitations in terms of PI location, project location. In other words, they'll fund a project that is in a specific location. EPSCoR requirements, that's just a program to fund under populated or states that don't meet a certain fiscal threshold. And most of the time, West Virginia does not. So we're usually an EPSCoR state. That institution has to be located in the state. So this is actually good for us because since we are listed as an EPSCoR state, we have access to, well, priority, I suppose is the way to say it, to funds that others may not. In other words, we'll kind of jump up in the stack of applicants a little bit higher. It's still competitive, mind you, but we'll get sometimes a little bit of a priority because, well, we need that investment, federal investment. And also sometimes there's an issue about PI status. Maybe the PI has to be an early investigator. Maybe it's intended for graduate students only. Or maybe that person has to be a senior investigator or something like that. Those stipulations do exist most of the time. In terms of limitations, is there a limit on the number of proposals a PI or institution can submit? Sometimes that's the case. Sometimes a request for proposals, they'll explicitly say only one from a given institution. If there is that limit on the number of proposals the agency will accept from a given institution, typically the university will run its own internal competition first. So that happens often. The university research corporation will solicit for like basically letters of intent, a little bit more than those, usually a little more in depth. And then there's a campus competition, and one person then is chosen by the research corporation to go forward. Is cost share required? So sometimes a funding agency will say, we'll give you $1 if you give us $1. So that's cost share. That's a 1-to-1 cost share, or they'll say a 50% cost share. In other words, for every $1 we give you, we want you to invest a half $1. There are a lot of different ways to do cost share. Sometimes that's required, sometimes it's not. Some funding agencies do that to get more bang out of the buck, more investment, another larger pot of money to do more, hopefully. Other times they want you to have fiscal skin in it, and that's one way to do that as well, to get an investment that way, a dedication to the program. If you plan to include an international collaborator, will the agency allow it? So that's something to always think about. They typically do allow that, but the most important part of that is that while it's often allowed, they don't always let the funds transfer to that international collaborator. In other words, an international funds transfer. So that's something that's also really important to keep in mind. About funding. So is the funding range and the project length appropriate for your planned project? Can indirect costs, or F&A, be requested in the budget? If so, you must either use the rate provided in the solicitation. In other words, they'll say something like indirect cost rate must be 10%. Or if permitted or not stated, the West Virginia University's indirect rate is currently 52%. What that means is if you get a grant for $100,000 and full F&A is allowed, you're going to lose $52,000 of that right off the top. As soon as it hits campus is going to take that, and you're going to get 48. You got it right. That does affect your ability to do your research, and so you have to account for that F&A in your program or your research planning. It's really important. When salary requests are included in the budget, make sure you're using the most recent fringe benefit rates for the university. Most solicitations will give you some type of an idea of how much money they have and how many projects they can fund. This can be useful to know from the start and might help you gauge the competitiveness of the grant program. For example, they may say, an agency may say, we have $34 million and we're going to open this solicitation for grants up to $350,000 each. Well, that equates to a lot of grants, a lot of projects they're going to fund, right? Or they may say, we have $35 million and we're going to fund 3 projects. Either way, you get the sense one is going to be a little more competitive than the other. and that helps you to make decisions. On one hand, you get a lot more money, but at the same time, it's incredibly competitive, really incredibly competitive. The other hand, you get less money, but you're more likely to get funded. And there are pros and cons to either way. And it just very much depends on the type of research project or potentially teaching that you're interested in pursuing. Other do's: if you have questions about whether your particular project or idea would fit well with a given solicitation, you can always contact the cognizant program officer at the grant giving agency. Most RFAs, requests for applications, or RFPs will include a name of somebody to contact if you have questions. NSF particularly encourages researchers to contact their program officers. In fact, National Science Foundation's mantra is ask early and ask often, and they're not kidding. When it comes to NSF, that's really important. There's a lot of nuances in their programs, their projects, and their proposal processes. That was a lot of P's, but you get the point. And so ask early, ask often. Develop a budget early on, even if it's just a draft. This will help you to realize project feasibilities in relation to the dollars you have to work with at an early stage. In the event you conclude that the allowed budget won't work with your project, that's important. And it may help you to narrow or tighten your project scope to its appropriate level. So if, for example, you ignore the budget at the first and start working on the project narrative for, say, 2 months with the assumption that you will have 2 PhD students helping you, but then you realize once you get to the budget that you'll only be able to include 1 PhD student, you might end up having to rework your project narrative quite a bit. Start early with your budget. Key point. Personally, I plan my narratives, the written section of the proposal, around the budget. So the budget is usually the first thing I do. I look at the funds available, and then I plug numbers into it and see what happens. This gets back to that FNA, fiscal administrative withdrawal, that the campus can take. And that will really drop the amount of funding you have available. And there are other costs as well to run a research program. So it's really worth it to start working on your budget very, very early. Another smart do is if you are including a subaward. So a subaward, that's where you might contract with an outside entity or partner with an outside entity that will be doing some part of the project that you wouldn't be doing. Okay, so it's a subaward. You want to make sure to involve the subawardee in the planning, et cetera, early on. And that seems like a common sense statement, but you'd be surprised. Generally, you should assume that the subawardee will need to submit their portion of the proposal to their OSP at least 5 to 7 business days before you need to submit the entire proposal to WVU OSP. So just to restate, they're also going to have to, your partner or your subawardee is going to have to submit through their OSP also. And so you're going to basically need to double up that time. So again, you want to start early. You basically need to follow the solicitation guidelines and requirements to the letter. If you don't, your proposal may be rejected entirely. It's happened. Or reviewers may pick up on a minor discrepancy and score you poorly for ignoring part of the requirements. This happens, folks. It happens a lot. Many agencies have their own master proposal guide that contains universal instructions for any proposal submitted to them. So how to develop your biographical sketch, for example. Sometimes the instructions in the solicitation will deviate from the master guide for a given item. In these situations, always follow the instructions in the solicitation. All right, here's just a few don'ts. Don't give yourself and your colleagues too little time. That's a reoccurring mantra here. This cannot be overstated. Start as early as you can. Use all, so that you've got lots of time. Don't pad your budget. or at least try not to. What does that mean? It means you ask for more money than you really need. NSF is especially sensitive to this. They emphasize that you ask only for what you need and not what you can get. Basically, the various requests in the budget need to be justifiable and reasonable. This also means that you should not ask for too little, because that will raise an eyebrow as much as asking too much. The solicitation may provide additional details on what you cannot include in your budget. So it might say you cannot include equipment. Equipment is usually something that costs over $5,000 per item. That number varies by institution, depending on what institution you're in. Or maybe it includes, you can't include construction. You can't build yourself a new house on this using this funds, or a new lab or something like that. Sometimes you can, but those are specific projects. Although I've never heard anybody building their house with it. But sometimes you can build a lab, okay, something like that. That's a specific grant that you would go after for a specific purpose. Maybe it's a teaching lab or something like that. So don't try to get around these limitations, as your proposal is guaranteed to be rejected if you do, for sure. WVU OSP is very good at catching these things and will ask you to make changes prior to the final submission. You can count on it. You cannot include cost share unless it's required in the solicitation. And the reason for that is multifold. The cost share increases complexity of grants, usually because it implies a partnership of some kind. Some entity is going to donate or supply either labor or funding or something, or a vehicle or travel or whatever that might be to your project. And that requires then a whole nother set of administrative oversight kind of stuff. And it adds a complexity to any grant proposal. It's not to suggest it's a bad thing, because, and I've had a number of grants with cost share, and through those you do build really nice partnerships that last a very long time. So it's a kind of a wash, I guess. It's worth it if you have the opportunity. So now we're going to shift into the proposal requirements or content. So most proposals will, at a minimum, require the following elements in some form. Especially federal agencies such as National Science Foundation, U.S. Department of Agriculture, Environmental Protection Agency, and the Department of Energy. They're going to ask for a summary or an abstract. They're going to ask for a project narrative and description. That's usually the body of the proposal. And usually somewhere between 8 and 16 pages, something like that. Depends again on the agency. They're going to ask for references cited. They're going to ask for information about facilities, equipment, and other resources that you may have access to. That's important to them because that suggests to them that you have the infrastructure to support the project that you're requesting funds for. They're going to ask about some data management plan. If you're collecting data, what are you doing with the data? They may even ask you to put it in a public available repository of some kind. That's increasingly being asked. They're going to ask for budget justification. So you've got their budget, right? You can put that in an Excel spreadsheet, and it really is, by the way, but it's an elaborate budget. And then you have to write a page or two to justify every single penny on it and every single category. Personal documents often include a biographical sketch, conflict of interest, current and pending support. That's usually it in terms of the personal documents, but sometimes there are others. Sometimes they'll ask for letters of support, things like that. Additional items may include various letters, such as institutional letters or collaboration letters. They may even ask for a management plan or a logic model, mentoring plan if you have postdocs or sometimes PhDs that are involved in the work, and so on and so forth. It's a complicated process. It's good to have help. Here are some available resources at WVU. So I am going to actually forward this presentation to Darien, and she's going to post it, as I understand, to your Google Drive. And you should be able to click right on these links and learn a lot about them. So at WVU, we have facilities and administration and fringe benefits website. That's where you get to keep an eye on what fringe rates are, what's our FNA rates, and that kind of thing. Practical grant submission information, so general information, research. There's a link to the research office. That's the WVU research office, and the Office of Sponsored Programs, as well as the WVU internal grants process. So WVU does have some grants that are internal. Sometimes they're available to graduate students, which you may be aware. And then there's also this pivot. which is a resource to help you to find collaborators and also to help you find venues for specific topic areas. So if you have an idea, but you don't know where to find the funding, you might try the Pivot site out and see what happens. In terms of locating funding opportunities, here's just a few ideas. Grants.gov, highly recommend this one. You can basically set up a search that suits your interests, and it'll send you periodic updates. I think they do as often as daily. They do weekly and monthly, I think too. Other popular agencies, the USDA, NSF, EPA, DOE, NIH. And I'll also say that there are sites for our state agencies, so Conservation Agency, and many others, DEP, and so on and so forth. And sometimes you can hook up. Sometimes they will have a page where they'll list funding. But with agencies, my experience has been that the best way to proceed with getting funding from and with agencies is to find someone there to work with, a team leader, someone that's doing the types of things that you're interested in, and fostering a relationship and working towards a collaboration in that regard. So timelines, they vary greatly, as I said earlier, and now you no doubt have an idea why. So 1, plan ahead. 2, start early. Keep moving and stay focused. So if you make a decision to go after funding, get started and keep moving, stay focused, because the clock's ticking until for submission. I see all the time, I would say 90% at least of the time, faculty will identify a venue and then they'll put it off as long as possible. It takes as much energy and brain power and time and everything like that to write a grant proposal as it does to write a peer-reviewed article. I'm not kidding. And it's an amazing investment of time. But you should take the time to do it right and do it well. And if you do that, then you can use a lot of that information as you start to work on publications down the road. So it's all part of this necessary process. Be aware of speed bumps and plan on some. Plan on slowdowns, learning something that slows you down for a couple days, waiting on somebody, or even if it's OSP, slows things down. Plan on speed bumps. By the way, I have found without fail all these years that in academia, anything you want to get done takes about 3 times longer than you think. And that's not an arbitrary number. It seems to be about 3 times. It takes about 3 times longer. It's amazing. So it's good to start early, keep on going, keep moving, and be prepared for that. OSP deadline is 5 working days ahead of submission deadline at WVU. That's so they have all the time that they need to review it. And they do a very good job, by the way. It's really worth it to work with them and have that relationship. In terms, again, of this timeline in the Institute, so when I started at West Virginia, and in particular in Davis College, I realized that one of the things that we're missing in the college is a support system for helping faculty and graduate students to go after funding. Questions like you're asking, like, how do you do this? Where do you find a venue? How do you write all those documents? What do we do here? And so about 3 years ago, I started this pre-proposal assistance program in the Institute. And so, by the way, the Institute is a cross-campus institute. It doesn't technically reside in Davis College, but we are physically in the college. And so we partner with the college and all the faculty, and it's really been a wonderful thing to do. And we work with a lot of faculty now in terms of helping them to develop their grant proposals and that kind of thing. Anyway, so here's this flow diagram. It's almost dichotomous, except for when it's not. And it works kind of like this. If you look at the top, there's this this top third, which is 4 to 12 months out. Identify your venue. Do you have an idea, or maybe identify an idea? Do you have an idea? If the answer is yes, there's a pathway. If the answer is no, there's a different pathway. One of those pathways is, if I have an idea, no, you can email me basically at the Institute, and I will meet with you. or one of my admin staff will, or both. Usually it's both. And we'll discuss the idea, and then we'll help you to find an appropriate funding source. If yes, then we start to organize that plan and the project and so on and so forth. If no, we reorganize to accommodate funding. Sometimes you have an idea, and this has happened to me a lot. You'll have an idea that you think is like earth-shattering, going to make everything better, but nobody's funding that right now. And in fact, when you call somebody at NSF and you say, hey, I've got this great idea, it sounds like this, and da-da-da-da-da, and they're like, what? So it's just not your time yet. So you got to hold on to that, take a note, and then take a look at what they are funding, and then try to reorganize your thoughts to fit that. And then we can help you to develop that proposal. That's how that works, at least through the Institute. The middle section is we're about 2 months out. So 2 months out from submission. We'll help to develop a synopsis and templates, organize and manage the submission process, budget development, forms completion, animal care and use, and so on and so forth. So we help to organize all of those with you, right? So we'll send you templates basically, and we'll say, we need this information from you. We've filled out this part already, but we need this from you, and like that. And we have actually helped at least a couple grad students from FNR that have gone after some grad student funding in the past. So this has worked. We send the draft, you send draft of everything to us. If there are changes, the process iterates and we clean it up and fix it. And about a week out, then we submit to OSP, and then we will serve as an interface between you and OSP, because OSP might sometimes come back with strange questions, difficult questions that we are used to hearing, and we can help and expedite all of that. Basically, it just removes a lot of the process and burden of the time commitment from folks to do this. So I share this not because I'm selling this program, I'm sharing it to fit the question about the timeline. So again, 4 to 12 months out, you want to be doing this top part, 2 months in the middle, and 1 kind of the stuff on the bottom. And I think my feeling is that's always been a pretty helpful diagram for folks to think about. So just a final closing thought is that I have, while this group that I'm speaking to is DFNR folks, you've noticed that I've spoken in a very, very general way. And that's because the rules are pretty much the same, no matter where you are in the college or anywhere on our campus. And so I've tried to keep that information more general, because it's pretty much the same no matter where you're located, because again, you're working with the agency and it's not really divisions or colleges may not have any effect over changing those processes. So, okay, well, thanks so much. That's all I had for today. I'm happy to field any questions, or I would invite you to reach out to me anytime at the phone or the email address below. And thanks again, Darien, for the opportunity to be here. And again, thanks. Have a happy holidays.
That was great, Jason. Thank you. I had a question that I want to real quick ask. So you mentioned that there was an OSP for universities and co-collaborators, depending on what institution they're at, they have their own separate OSPs. Do you know if there is an equivalent for government agencies? Like, for instance, if I had a project that I was writing a grant proposal for, and I wanted to loop in a collaborator from the Division of Natural Resources, for instance, do they have a certain process like that they have to go through as well?
Usually a state or a Fed agency like that will have an internal fiscal process that they also have to go through. That's correct. Federal agencies, not so much, like NSF, right? Those are folks that get a whole bunch of money from the federal government that then have to dole the dollars out. And so they don't really have to check with their accountant except to say, yeah, we're getting rid of the money, and but other folks, state Fed agencies, they have specific allocations for those funds, and they want to make sure that they're meeting those allocations, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
And then all the questions that I got via email were pretty clearly discussed in your talk. So Very well done.
Great.
That
All right.
thanks.
Oh, great. I'm glad to hear that. So I hit the mark. That's excellent.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess I'll just quickly add, I worked with Felix and Laura for an NSF grant, and it was super helpful, and
That's
it
how I
was
know
awesome.
you. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. That's how I know you. Great. Yeah. We communicate a lot in the Institute. That's one of the things I think that makes us successful is we work well together and we communicate a lot. And so I like to know, who it is we're helping, what we're doing. And I recall that, Hannah. I'm glad it worked well. I appreciate the feedback. That's really important.
Yeah, no, I was very pleased with how that worked out. We didn't get the grant, but
Yeah.
but I was still pleased with the process.
Well, that's not our fault, is it? Anyway,
No,
well, I'm glad.
yeah.
I'm glad, and we're happy to help. We're happy to help. It's kind of it's a strange time. I mean, in the last decade, in particular, universities are asking more of their faculty. They're asking more of their graduate students, and in fact, many faculty nowadays will have grad students writing grant proposals, not just to support the grad student themselves, but also to help to write proposals to support the research program of the faculty. It's very demanding, and there's not, it's not like there are ways around that. And it's demanding on the time of faculty and students. And so I think it's really important that if institutions are going to be asking more of our students and faculty, that we also figure out ways to provide more support to their success. And writing proposals has just become this super complex process. And that was a long monologue just to say I'm really glad that it worked out for you. We're happy to help.
Yeah, very grateful for your help.
Okay.
Yeah, that actually reminds me of a course that's being offered this upcoming semester that's like scientific writing, and pretty much the entire goal of the course is to essentially do a mock grant application or what have you, and learning every section of it. And I'm really bummed that they're just now, offering it, because, had you told me 2.5 years ago that was a thing, I would have been like, yes.
It's really important because getting grants is so much more competitive. It's really difficult. There's a lot of competition, and funding is getting tighter, rougher, more difficult. There's less funding, and policies and programs are changing, and so you really do want to take the time and energy to learn how to do it well. You got to learn to do it really well if you want to be successful. And I don't even like saying that way. It's just the truth, I guess. And but at the same time, you want to be the best you that you can be, and this is part of that process too. And learning how to meet those expectations for funding agencies and develop that world-class research program and become that world-class researcher that you want to be and you will be. So, yeah.
Okay, so I'm wondering, and it's kind of inevitable that the question is asked given the status of the world, but I have heard that the peer review process is being impacted by COVID-19. And I'm wondering if you think the grant application process is being affected by the pandemic.
Wow, that's a really difficult one. Because on one hand, there's been the political process in DC has led to some upheaval and changes in federal agencies. For example, the USDA, National Institute of Food and Ag, is now in Kansas City. It's moved, right? That was a major disruption, and these types of disruptions slow things down. And that's not a COVID thing. That's a current administration thing. And so at the same time, COVID probably has slowed down some of this process because the way we do business has changed. And so by definition, if the way we do business has changed, and this is part of the business, then it's no doubt changed. With that said, I sat on a Department of Energy panel review panel this just a month and a half or so ago that was extremely productive. It was one of the best I've ever been on. And it was right on time, right on schedule, and went very, very well. With that said, Dr. Stefan, who's in FNR, is about to sit on a USDA NIFA panel that's running late. So, you know, it's really hard to know. I would also say that the USDA NIFA Foundational Series, which is a massive series of grants, RFPs that come out, was over 6 months late coming out this last round. And some of that had to do with the move to Kansas City, and some of it had to do with administrative slowdowns due to COVID. So I would just, you know, you've just, while these things are unfortunate, my recommendation is get used to speed bumps. And because if it's not an administration telling some agency to move across the country for whatever reason, or another pandemic, hopefully that never happens again. But it's going to be something else that slows the works down, right? And so you have to, as a scientist, you know, you want to get things done. I'll tell you, when I graduated with my PhD, it was like I got turned loose in Santa's workshop. It was, I mean, it has never changed for me. It'll be the same for you if that's your intention. And so you want to get out in front of it. You want to work hard, write lots of grants. Some are going to land, some are not. And don't take it personally when they don't. And I've had most of mine have been rejected, you know, and that's just the way it is. And there's always slowdowns, and I'm waiting to hear on one I've had out now for well over a year because of them being slowed down. And so, yeah, just it happens.
Jason, I had a question. What are the most likely avenues for grad students or postdocs in terms of funding? Because like NSF is like pretty unlikely. So like where should we go for the highest chance of success?
That's an interesting question. I am finding that the classic venues that are intended to fund postdocs, so you know, a decade ago, a student, a recent graduate could go after some funding alone, and they could have a fair shot at it. And they would identify an institution, maybe and a professor usually in a program, and they would write this thing up to do specific things, and funding happened. And that's just less. It's so much more competitive now, and so what I've been finding has more of a return on the proposal submission investment is to write research project up, and inside of it, fund a postdoc or fund a PhD student. So the proposal is about a research project. It's not about a postdoc or a PhD student. The difficult side of that is that the student becomes beholden to the research program of the PI, I guess, of the advisor. And I don't mean that's not necessarily a bad thing at all, but sometimes as a postdoc in particular, you want the freedom to create and explore, right? And you don't always get that when you have funding that is for a project that has specific outcomes, and the PI is like, nope, we got to do this, and this, so that we can get this done, and so that someday they'll fund us again. And that's right, and that's true. And if your name is on it and it goes well, that's also good for you. But it's a little bit of a different pathway. But so what I've been doing is I've been doing both. By the way, in my program, I have a postdoc right now. She's writing grants by herself, and I'm submitting grants with her funded in it, and because we want something to land, because I'd like her to stick around. So yeah, it takes so much. It just takes a lot of effort and different angles. You know, did that help a little bit? Or
I think so. So like, are you looking at federal sources for funding?
Mostly.
Okay.
Yeah. The cost to state. My experience has been that state agencies other entities within states or regions even, they want to fund actions. Okay, like practices. There we go. They want to fund a practice, best management practice, or something like that, and they don't want to fund the salary. Postdoc salary, when you add fringe on to a postdoc, at a base salary, you're looking at least $60,000 a year. So for a state or a state agency or someone like that, that really is a lot. And it really does bite into their funding. And they may be less skittish about that money, but what they do know is that somebody else is going to submit a proposal where they're not asking for it. And so what are they going to do? Well, they're going to fund the one where they get more action done on the landscape or whatever that might be, because those folks figured out a way to otherwise fund the labor side of it. And so what I have found is working better is to, one, go after the federal dollars, because they're usually larger pots of money, and there's more of an expectation of labor there, and an expectation that, yeah, we're going to have to support these people to do this work. That has to come from somewhere. Now, the downside of that is that most federal funding is subject to full F&A rates from institutions. And by the way, ours is, as I said, 52%, but it's definitely not the highest in the country, not by a long shot. So, yeah, I'm getting depressed. Why am I doing this? You gotta really keep after it. I see a lot of faculty they just get really bogged down in this, and it keeps them from moving, and it's important not to let that happen. It's easy to get overwhelmed by it, and it's good if you can find somebody in your corner to provide support and help. So that's really important and hard to find, unfortunately. So. Anything else? Any other questions?
I don't have any, I don't think.
Okay.
All right.
Well, so hey, thank you both for the opportunity. I'm not disheartened by the small turnout at all, because one thing I know for sure is that you two really care about this topic, really do. And the other is that I think there will be others that might take a look. And the nice thing about a video is you can watch a little bit at a time. and so, and you can skip that part, or just go to the PDF and click on the little buttons. So it's all good. And I'm just happy to have had the opportunity. And it's just always so nice to see you, Darien. I'm so proud of you and the work you've done. And Hannah, you too. And thank you for the opportunity to help you. And if there's anything that, of course, that I can do or the Institute can do for either of you, please don't, or your colleagues, don't hesitate to reach out, okay? And of course, happy holidays.
Yes, thank you so much, Jason. It was great to hear from you. And yeah, you had a lot of insight, which is fantastic. And
okay,
yeah,
I appreciate that.
You have your contact information, and I'll make sure that people have it, and they can always send me an email as well if they need to get a hold of you somehow or whatever. So
okay, real good. I'll send you the talk like right now, so I don't forget.
Okay, awesome.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
Bye now.
See ya.
Thanks, Jason.